الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين ونصلي ونسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد فبأسانيدكم رحمكم الله تعالى. غفر الله لكم وللمسلمين والحاضرين أجمعين. إلى الإمام محمد بن الحسن رحمه الله تعالى قال أخبرنا مالك بن أنس عن يزيد بن زياد مولى لبني هاشم عن عبد الله بن رافع مولى أم سلمة رضي الله تعالى عنها زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه سأله عن وقت الصلاة فقال أبو هريرة أنا أخبرك صل الظهر إذا كان ظلك مثلك والعصر إذا كان ظلك مثليك والمغرب إذا غربت الشمس والعشاء ما بينك وبين ثلث الليل فإن نمت إلى نصف الليل فلا نامت عينك وصل الصبح بغلس. قال محمد وهذا قول أبي حنيفة في وقت العصر وكان يرى الإسفار بالفجر. وأما في قولنا فإنا نقول إذا زاد الظل على المثل فصار مثل الشيء وزيادة من حين زالت الشمس فقد دخل وقت العصر. وأما أبو حنيفة فقال لا يدخل وقت العصر حتى يصير الظل مثليه.
نعم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So you killed me twice. First you said rahimakumullah and then you said ghafarallahu lakum. يعني استغفروا لأخيكم. يعني you make dua maghfirah when the person passes away. نعم. So normally the way we should start is actually what our teacher Sheikh Safwan, he used to although I am in need of dua al-maghfirah, but he used to quote Sheikh Yunus in this regard, Sheikh Yunus Jonfori rahimahullah ta'ala, because he studied with him. And Sheikh Yunus, whenever he would come to Al-Masjid al-Nabawi, they would to visit for Umrah in Medina or Mecca, they would sit with him and they would read books of hadith to him. So normally over there, whenever the students, they start the recitation, they start off by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sending salutations upon the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And then they normally start off by saying, Allahumma ghfir lana wa li shaykhina wa li jami'i al-hadirina wal-muslimin, and so on and so forth. So they would continue doing that. So one time Shaykh Yunus said to them that, what sin did I commit that you keep on saying, Allahumma ghfir li shaykhina? Oh Allah, forgive our Shaykh. And he's like, what sin did I commit? Instead of saying, oh Allah, forgive our Shaykh, say, Allahumma arda an shaykhina, or Allahumma barik li shaykhina, or so on and so forth. So Shaykh Safwan told us this incident. And from then on, in our class with him, no one would ever say Allahumma ghfir li shaykhina. We would always say Allahumma barik li shaykhina. But mashallah, our reader, he started off by saying rahimakumullah. And he followed it up with saying ghafarallahu lakum. So first he killed me with the rahimakumullah, and then after that he was like ghafarallahu lakum. And dua maghfirah. Naam, la ba's. طيب, so we were on the first narration still, and towards the end of it we arrived where he says فإن نمت إلى نصف الليل فلا نامت عينك وصل الصبح بغلس. and pray as-subh, yani the Fajr Salah bi ghalas. Now there are multiple different riwayat, and some of the different riwayat of Muwatta, this has been transmitted in different ways, this exact word. So in the riwayah of Yahya bin Yahya al-Laythi, this word is transmitted with the wording ghabash, bi ghabash, and it's mentioned in your hashiyah, whoever has the hashiyah with the tahqiq of Shaykh Safwan. في موطأ يحيى بغبش وقال يعني الغلس. So the way it is in his version is, the wording is بغبش, غا, ba, and sheen, and then right after that he says himself يعني الغلس, and what he intends by غبش is الغلس. And in the riwayah of Ubaidullah عن أبيه, and in the riwayah of نعم, is بغبس with a sin, not a sheen. غبس with a sheen, with a sin, not a sheen. So now there's three different wordings. One is ghalas, which we have over here. Then we have ghabash, and we have ghabas. We have ghabas. And all of them, the meaning of all of them is very similar. In fact, Al-Khattabi, he says, Al-ghabash bil-ba'i wa sheen qabla al-ghabas. So first thing which will occur is ghabash, then ghabas with a sin, then ghalas. Okay, and all of them are referring to the last portion of the night. All of them are referring to literally the end of the night, which is right at the beginning time of Fajr. So when it says وَصَلِّ الصُّبْحَ بِغَلَسٍ, what's intended is that pray Fajr Salah at a time where the darkness is so severe that it's like very close to the night time. Meaning it's still very dark and you can't see each other. Like this narration, as Imam Muhammad rahimahullah ta'ala says, هذا قول أبي حنيفة في وقت العصر. Like what's he referring to when he says هذا قول أبي حنيفة في وقت العصر? He's referring to the statement of Abu Hurairah where he says وَالْعَصْرَ إِذَا كَانَ ظِلُّكَ مِثْلَيْكَ. And we mentioned some Hanafiya use this narration istidlalan as a proof that Asr, the timing of Asr, starts when the shadow reaches double the length of the individual, the height of the individual, based on this wording وَالْعَصْرَ إِذَا كَانَ ظِلُّكَ مِثْلَيْكَ. And we mentioned that this hadith cannot be used as a proof for that, because in reality this is a mukhtasar. The hadith is mukhtasar. It is a concise version of another narration that Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates. In this one, this is mawquf ala Abi Hurairah. This is only upon or from the statement of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, is not transmitting it from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the actual version where Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he transmits this narration from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in that version it mentions the beginning time and the end timing of each salah. And وَالْعَصْرَ إِذَا كَانَ ظِلُّكَ مِثْلَيْكَ, this was meant to be the end timing of Asr, not the beginning timing of Asr, based on the narration we mentioned and the explanation that we gave. But based on this wording, which is وَالْعَصْرَ إِذَا كَانَ ظِلُّكَ مِثْلَيْكَ, Imam Muhammad says this is the opinion of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. Then he says وَكَانَ يَرَى الْإِسْفَارَ بِالْفَجْرِ. وَكَانَ يَرَى الْإِسْفَارَ بِالْفَجْرِ. So with regards to the timing of Fajr, we mentioned that everyone agrees that the timing of Fajr begins at the rising of what we call Al-Fajr As-Sadiq, which is the redness in the horizon. And it ends with طلوع الشمس, the rising of the sun. The rising of the sun. So initially when the time starts, it's still very dark outside. You can't really see the people around you. There's still a subtle or a light amount of redness that comes on the horizon because the sun is going to rise. Let's say, for example, sunrise is at, let's say, 6 a.m. 1.5 hours before that, let's say, for example, Fajr time starts 5:30 or 4:30 or 4:45 a.m. around that timing. Because the sun is going to rise at 6 a.m., 1.5 hours before, there's already effects of that you see on the horizon, which is the subtle redness that comes onto the horizon. And before that, the whiteness. The whiteness we called it Al-Fajr Al-Kadhib, and the redness is called Al-Fajr As-Sadiq. Everyone agrees Fajr time starts then. And everyone agrees Fajr time finishes and completes at the time of Tulu' al-Shams. Like we mentioned, there were different versions. Some said that at the time of Isfar as well. However, those were weaker riwayat. Overall, people are agreeing that Fajr time will end at Tulu' al-Shams. However, they disagreed as to what timing is preferred. Meaning, when is it preferable to pray Salatul Fajr? Not what is the timing of Fajr, but when is it preferred to pray Salatul Fajr? And there are two main opinions in this. And one opinion kind of tries to combine between the two. So in total, we have three opinions. The first opinion is, as he mentions, كَانَ يَرَى الْإِسْفَارَ بِالْفَجْرِ. The first opinion is that Fajr Salah should be performed when it is almost or it's getting bright outside. So as I mentioned, right before the sun actually rises, 10-15 minutes, it starts getting extremely bright outside. Not as much as after the sun would have risen, but it's so bright that you can actually see around, and you can, for example, see very clearly the people around you and so on and so forth. So this is before the sun rises. This time, the 10-15 minutes before sunrise, when it starts getting bright outside, to the point that you can see around and you can easily, visibly see your surroundings, that time is known as al-isfar. Al-isfar. This is the opinion of the Hanafiya, that it is more preferred that a person should not pray Salatul Fajr right as the timing of Fajr starts. So let's say Fajr timing starts at 4:45 a.m. Don't pray at 4:45 a.m. Wait. When is sunrise? 6 a.m. Pray around 5:35, 5:40, 5:45. That timing is better. Shouldn't be too close to 6 a.m. But around 5:45ish, that would be a good timing for Fajr. And this is known as al-isfar. Okay, so the Ahnaf say this is the more preferred timing for Salatul Fajr. Again, you can pray the entire timing. There's no khilaf in that. It's just a khilaf as to what is al-afdal, what is more preferred. The second opinion is the opinion of the Jumhur, along with the Shafi'iyya and others, which is that the best timing to pray Fajr is al-ghalas. Ghalas is referring to the exact moment Fajr time starts. So 4:45. If it starts at 4:45, 4:45. Awwal al-waqt. That is the best timing to pray Fajr. And we mentioned why it's called ghalas, because it is the end of the night and it's still very dark outside and you cannot see your surroundings. Your surroundings are not visible to you. So their opinion is that it is better to pray in al-ghalas. And there's a third opinion that is mentioned that tried to do jama' between these two opinions. And we're going to mention who held this opinion as well as why they held this opinion. And that is the opinion that you should start in ghalas, meaning start when it's dark outside, and prolong Fajr for so long that you finish in isfar. So start like around 4:55, 5 a.m. and continue praying Fajr for 45 minutes. Okay, until you finish off in isfar where it's so bright outside. Okay, this is the third opinion, that this is the most preferred method of praying. Alright, what are the adillah, what are the proofs that are presented by the three opinions? So number one, the proof of the Hanafiya, which would go against this hadith. This hadith is obviously, evidently, a proof on behalf of the Shafi'i and the Jumhur, because the wording is وَصَلِّ الصُّبْحِ بِغَلَسٍ. طيب, the Hanafiya, they use a hadith which is mentioned, and there's no doubt that this hadith is authentic as well. In At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions or he narrates from Rafi' ibn Khadij radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who says, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول أسفروا بالفجر فإنه أعظم للأجر. أسفروا بالفجر فإنه أعظم للأجر. That's the exact wording of the hadith. Meaning, make bright Fajr because it is more rewarding. When you pray Fajr, make sure it's bright. That's what أسفروا بالفجر means. Literally from Isfar. فإنه أعظم للأجر, because it is more rewarding. And then At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala says وفي الباب عن أبي برزة وجابر وبلال, and then he says حديث رافع بن خديج حديث حسن صحيح. There's no doubt in the authenticity of this narration. نعم. And then he says وقد رأى غير واحد من أهل العلم من أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم والتابعين الإسفار بصلاة الفجر وبه يقول سفيان الثوري. He says a number of the Sahaba and the Tabi'un used to do this. They used to consider the timing for Fajr to be better, or the better timing for Fajr was when it is bright outside, and he says that is the opinion of Sufyan al-Thawri as well. And At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala, just as a side note, he mentions the opinion of the muhaddithun usually. One very interesting muhaddith is Sufyan al-Thawri. Why? Because Sufyan al-Thawri, he's from the scholars of Kufa. He's from the muhaddithin of Kufa. And he was a great muhaddith, with no doubt. And he was also a great faqih. He also has a jami' which is compiled in fiqh. A jami' which is compiled in fiqh. And there was a slight rivalry between him and the Ahlul Rai from Kufa that were not really, like for example, Imam Sufyan al-Thawri was classified from the category of the muhaddithun of Kufa. And then there were other scholars that were fuqaha, that were known to be from the Ahlul Rai or the fuqaha of Kufa. And there was a slight rivalry between them. including Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. So Sufyan al-Thawri was a mu'asir. He was the same time as Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. Al-Thawri passed away in 161, Abu Hanifa passed away in 150. So they had a slight, rivalry. But he's a very important scholar from the scholars of Kufa. Why am I saying this? Because if Sufyan al-Thawri is holding an opinion in line with the scholars of Kufa, the ulama of Kufa, okay, against the normal opinion of the muhaddithin, that is very interesting. It's important to keep those opinions in mind. Because normally you would assume that the tariqah of Ahlul Hadith, the muhaddithun, they would normally hold the same opinion. Sufyan al-Thawri was from the muhaddithun. But yet in many masail, it's not just one mas'ala. In many masail, he used to actually adopt the opinion of the scholars of Kufa, the fuqaha of Kufa, over the opinion of the muhaddithin. And this is one example of that. كان يرى الإسفار بالفجر. Exactly in line with Imam Abu Hanifa and the rest of the fuqaha of Kufa. And it wasn't only Abu Hanifa, it was the fuqaha of Kufa in general that used to act upon al-isfar bil-fajr. طيب, likewise, in Ibn Hibban, the wording is أسفروا بصلاة الصبح فإنه أعظم للأجر. And in one wording, فكلما أصبحتم بالصبح فإنه أعظم لأجوركم. And the wording of Tabrani, وكلما أسفرتم بالفجر فإنه أعظم للأجر. So this hadith is narrated from a number of ways. And in the hadith of Rafi in Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar, the wording is slightly different. It's not أسفروا بالفجر, it's نوروا بالفجر. نوروا بالفجر فإنه أعظم للأجر. So this is one hadith that is used by the Hanafi. Another hadith that is used as a proof of the Hanafiya is where the hadith of Bukhari is mentioned, وَكَانَ يَنْفَتِلُ مِنْ صَلَاةِ الْغَدَاةِ حِينَ يَعْرِفُ الرَّجُلُ جَلِيسَهُ وَيَقْرَأُ بِالسِّتِّينَ إِلَى الْمِئَةِ. When the Messenger would finish Salatul Fajr, it would be such that a person was able to recognize the one sitting beside him. That's how bright it was. And of course, Al-Masjid al-Nabawi did not have a roof at that time, in the time of the Messenger that would cover the entire masjid. A few leaves that would cover the front part of the masjid, but it did not have a roof that would cover the entire masjid. So if they are finishing salah at a point or at a time where one is able to recognize the person beside him, that means it's very bright outside, or it is bright outside. And that is the timing of isfar. And Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, he has the famous statement where he says, ما اجتمع أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على شيء ما اجتمعوا على التنوير. He says the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum did not unanimously agree upon anything the way they agreed upon at-tanwir, making sure that the Fajr is performed, and after Fajr is performed, they're able to see each other. And likewise, Dawood ibn Yazid al-Awdi, he narrates from his father, who says, كان علي رضي الله عنه يصلي بنا الفجر ونحن نتراءى بالشمس مخافة أن يكون قد طلعت. SubhanAllah. Ali radiallahu anhu used to lead us in Salatul Fajr, and we used to look out for the sun out of fear that maybe the sun has risen. Meaning, he delayed Fajr so long that they would fear that the sun might have risen. That's how long he was delaying Fajr, and towards the time of sunrise. So these are all the narrations that the first group, which are the group that says Al-Isfar is Afdal, these are the narrations that they're using as their mustadal. As for the opposite, and the ones that say Ghalas is more preferred, number one, they use the Hadithul Bab. This hadith right over here where Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says, صَلِّ الصُّبْحَ بِغَلَسٍ. صَلِّ الصُّبْحَ بِغَلَسٍ. And likewise, they use another narration, which Ibn Majah rahimahullah ta'ala transmits in his Sunan, from the tariq of Al-Awza'i, who says, حدثنا نهيك بن يريم الأوزاعي قال حدثنا مغيث بن سمي قال صليت بعبد الله بن الزبير الصبح بغلس فلما سلمت أقبلت على ابن عمر فقلت ما هذه الصلاة؟ قال هذه كانت صلاتنا مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وأبي بكر وعمر فلما طعن عمر أسفر بها عثمان. This is a very, very interesting narration. What's happening? Mughith bin Sumay, he says, I prayed with Abdullah ibn Zubair, meaning I prayed behind Abdullah ibn Zubair radiallahu anhu when he was the Amir. I prayed behind him Fajr Salah at the timing of Ghalas, when it was extremely dark outside. فَلَمَّا سَلَّمْت, after saying salam, I looked towards Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma and I said, what is this salah? So Mughith is not accustomed to this salah, and he's not, this is really interesting. There's a few things that are going on over here. We're going to explain how the beauty of the dalal of this narration, if it's proven to be authentic. However, he says, what is this salah? And it's something which he's not used to. So Ibn Umar replies by saying radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma that this is the salah we used to perform with the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam and Abu Bakr and Umar. But when Abu Bakr and Umar, but when Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was martyred and he was assassinated in Masjid Nabawi in Salatul Fajr, after that Uthman radiyallahu anhu started praying Fajr when it was bright outside. So over here there's two benefits. Number one is that if this is proven, it would suggest that in the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they used to perform Fajr at Ghalas. And that is the exact proof that is being presented by this opinion. And number two, it also tells the reason or mentions the reason why, if at the time of the Tabi'un, many were accustomed, like how we mentioned Ibrahim al-Nakha'i said, Ma ajma'a. We didn't find an ijma' amongst the Sahaba and Tabi'un. The way they did ijma', the way they were unanimously, they unanimously agreed upon the timing of Fajr, that it's in Ghalas. This will also give us a reason for that, which is that since the time of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he started doing isfar. Since the time of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he started doing isfar, which is to pray Fajr while it's still bright outside. Why? Because Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was assassinated while it was dark outside. طيب. Regarding the isnad of this, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala said isnaduhu hasan. And likewise others have mentioned explicitly that the isnad is sahih. This chain is authentic from Ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma. طيب. Another narration that Imam Malik narrates, as well as Bukhari and as well as Muslim, so it's in Sahihain, that the scholars who adopt the opinion of Ghalas, they use as a proof. From Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, she says, كنا نساء المؤمنين يصلين مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الصبح ثم ينصرفن متلففات بمروطهن ما يعرفن من الغلس. She says that the wives of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to perform Salatul Fajr with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She says متلففات بمروطهن, covered in their shawls, meaning they were covering themselves up after hijab was revealed. They would pray, they would come to the masjid, for example, while covering themselves and their beauty. ما يعرفن من الغلس. She says they would not be recognized because of the darkness outside. And they would pray salah and they would go back after salah, go back home, covering themselves up, and no one would be able to recognize them because of how dark it was. They wouldn't even notice that they came and they went. Just like we mentioned, as some mentioned, that after Fajr, they wouldn't be able to recognize the person sitting beside them. Naam. And this hadith is in Sahihain. Likewise, there's another narration, which is very interesting as well. Abu Dawood, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions this, and Ibn Hibban in his Sahih as well, and Al-Hazimi in Kitab al-Nasikh wal-Mansukh, from Abu Mas'ud al-Ansari. And it is a long hadith, the same hadith which is the hadith of Jibreel. The long hadith, the long narration, in which in one wording it says, أنه صلى الصبح بغلس. The first day he prayed Salatul Fajr at Ghalas. ثم صلى مرة أخرى فأسفر بها. The wording in this narration is that ثم صلى مرة أخرى فأسفر بها. Then he prayed the second day at the time of Isfar, which is brightness. ثم كانت صلاته بعد ذلك بالغلس إلى أن مات ولم يعد إلى أن يسفر. What's the wording? That after that, his salah was always at the timing of Ghalas, which is the early part, which when it's still dark outside, and he didn't once again after that, meaning the initial day when Jibreel led him in Isfar, that is the day he prayed with Isfar. After that, he never prayed with Isfar ever again. Okay? This is the wording of this narration. Now, if this narration is proven to be authentic, that is also a very strong proof. That is also a very, very strong proof. Because it's nas, it's sarih, and it's explicit when it comes to this situation. However, this narration that has this extra part, which is ثم كان صلاته بعد ذلك بالغلس إلى أن مات ولم يعد إلى أن يسفر. This version is from the narration of Usama ibn Zayd from Ibn Shihab. نعم, from the narration of Usama ibn Zayd from Ibn Shihab. And it's a long narration. The whole narration, actually, this is the same story that is mentioned in the first riwayah or the hadith of the Muwatta Imam Malik through the riwayah of Yahya bin Yahya al-Laythi. which is the narration that occurs or the incident that occurs between Urwa ibn Zubayr and Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, one time he prayed salah at a certain timing. So Urwa ibn Zubayr, he said to him, are you praying salah at this timing? And there was a conversation that occurred between the two. And in that, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz said to Urwa that, oh Urwa, be careful of what you say. Be careful of what you say. Possibly might be... No, it's not in this version, but it is in the version of Yahya bin Yahya al-Laythi. Naam. So Urwa ibn Zubayr then said to, or Umar ibn Abdul Aziz said to Urwa ibn Zubayr, be careful of what you say. So Urwa ibn Zubayr then transmitted the hadith from Abu Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Urwa said, سمعت بشير بن أبي مسعود يقول سمعت أبا مسعود الأنصاري يقول سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول نزل جبريل فأخبرني إلى آخر الحديث. So this is the hadith of Jibreel, and it's the famous hadith transmitted from the version or the chain of Urwa ibn Zubayr. طيب, who was the one who transmitted this from Urwa ibn, or mentioned this entire incident that occurred between Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and Urwa ibn Zubayr? That is Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. And the one who transmits from Ibn Shihab in this version with this extra part mentioned in the end is Usama ibn Zayd. Usama ibn Zayd. And many scholars mention that Usama, so number one, Ibn Khuzaymah as well as others have explicitly mentioned that this ziyada, the ending, which is ثم كان صلاته بعد ذلك بالغلس إلى أن مات ولم يعد إلى أن يسفر. This is only recognized from the students of Ibn Shihab through Usama ibn Zayd. That's it. Meaning none of the students of Ibn Shihab have mentioned this additional part in the end other than Usama ibn Zayd. And you'll study in the books of Mustalah that this is called ziyadatu thiqa. When there is a rawi that is trustworthy that adds an additional part to a narration that the other ruwat, the other narrators of that same teacher are not mentioning. And you also study the opinions of the ulama of hadith regarding this scenario when this occurs. And the correct opinion in this is that you can't say you accept it mutlaqan, and neither can you say that you reject it mutlaqan. Again, we're not talking about a rawi who is not thiqa, we're talking about a rawi who is thiqa. If there's an authentic narrator, let's say there's Ibn Shihab, for example, take our scenario. Ibn Shihab has a number of students, and all of them are narrating from him in one manner. Then there's one of the students that has an additional benefit. Then nobody else narrates. So the question is, okay, where did he get that from? Because if it was actually from the teacher, then everyone should have narrated it. But he's also trustworthy. So do you accept, because he's trustworthy, that this should be accepted or not? So in this, there are a number of factors that they look at. One of the factors that they look at is, number one, is there mukhalafa? The first thing that is looked at is that is there mukhalafa between the addition that is being added versus the other version that is narrated by the other students? And can we say that the two versions are contradicting each other? Or is it just extra benefit? So if the addition is actually such that it contradicts the initial statement of the rest of the narrators, that would be a problem. But if there's no contradiction and it's just an additional benefit, then in that situation, still they don't accept it at all times. Rather, they will look, even if this rawi is trustworthy, is his trustworthiness at such a high level that we can trust? Because normally, guys, when the idea is that whenever we call this in the mustalah of the muhaddithin tafarrud, whenever there is tafarrud, meaning from a teacher, like for example in this class, how many students are sitting? Now after this class finishes, let's say a number of students, for example, go and transmit a point that was mentioned in the class to others. And there's one point nobody remembers or nobody transmits, only one student from the entire class transmits. What's the likelihood of that? That is unlikely. So especially if the teacher is mashhur. So this also has to do with the teacher. So let's say the teacher is not mashhur. Teacher is not mashhur, meaning the teacher doesn't have a lot of students. Let's say there's a certain narrator that doesn't have many students to begin with. He only has one or two students. And then two of his students don't mention it and one of the students mentions it. That's not that questionable. But it becomes a bigger problem, or it raises a bigger question mark when the teacher is mashhur, like Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, who has so many students. He's one of the greatest ruwat of hadith. So now that he has so many students, and after having so many students, no one is able to transmit that part or that point or the narration in that manner other than one of his students. So now they look at that student. Is his trustworthiness at that level where it is able to override, meaning it is stronger than the gharaba, than the nakara, than the difficulty that would be assumed because he is the only one narrating it. Meaning the question mark that is raised in the mind of the scholar, which is that why is he the only one narrating this narration? That makes an individual pause and not accept it right directly. Is he so strong that he's able to remove that doubt and remove that issue and objection? Is that how trustworthy he is? Or is he trustworthy but he's not that strong? So over here, even the thiqat, they have levels. This is why it's really important to study maratib al-thiqat. Maratib al-thiqat is the lub of ilm al-ilal, meaning the crux, the core of ilm al-ilal, the science of ilal al-hadith, the hidden defects in narrations, and the science that pertains to that. It is recognizing that even the thiqat, just because we say arawi thiqa, does not mean that's it, he can never make a mistake. It's still possible he could make a mistake. And when there's mistakes made, what are the maratib? What are the levels of the trustworthy narrators? This is where the detail and the nuance exists, and this is what removes ilm al-hadith from being like a mathematical like formula where it's 1 + 1 = 2, and you're told, okay, this is exactly the way it works, and it's so precise. That is not ilm al-hadith. Ilm al-hadith, they always mention, is something which is dhawqi, and it's only attained after a long time of, they say, mulazama of mashayikh and muzawala, meaning continuing to repeat and look into the chains and so on and so forth. After a long time that a person spends with the chains, he's able to recognize the patterns and he's able to sense and figure out what seems wrong and what seems right. So it is not a black and white science at all. And the qawaid you study in the books of Mustalah are simply there to open the doors for you, to make you realize that, okay, these logical factors and principles and concepts, they can influence the authenticity. But they are not qawaid that are, 100% every single time applied the way they're written in the book. Ilm al-hadith is not law. Okay? It's not like fiqh. It's not like law. So in the word of law, the exact wording, that is what you abide by. That is how it works. That is not how ilm al-hadith is. It's a very flexible, a very detailed, and a very nuanced discipline that sometimes, a lot of times, great muhaddithun, they differ regarding a verdict upon a hadith because of this reason. Sometimes great muhaddithun, like one time we came across a narration in Tirmidhi where Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, he disagreed with his own teacher, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, regarding the final verdict. And in his jami', he said, I feel this version is better. But Imam Bukhari, my teacher, in his own sahih, he put the other version because he felt that one was better. Imagine that. His book's in Sahih Bukhari. The hadith is in Sahih Bukhari. Imam Tirmidhi, when he was writing his jami', he still gave preference to another chain. So this happens amongst the muhaddithun. So it's a very nuanced ilm. And anyone who thinks otherwise has not yet entered into the beauty and discovered the reality of how this ilm works. So anyways, Usama ibn Zayd, he narrates this from Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri with this extra part. Al-Khatib, he mentions that Usama made a mistake in this narration. Why? Because to begin with, the qissa of Mawaqit was not from the hadith of Abu Mas'ud. This narration shouldn't even be mentioned from Abu Mas'ud. Everyone else who mentions this narration from Zuhri does not mention, through the chain of Zuhri, does not mention Abu Mas'ud in between. It's just the qawl of Urwa. So it's mursal, and the qawl of Urwa is the one who mentions it. Or Zuhri, for example, says, Balagana anna Nabiya sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It's from the qawl of Zuhri. Or the qawl of Urwa. And if you look up the Muwatta of Yahya bin Yahya al-Laythi, see what the wording is exactly, and you'll get the actual version that, for example, the other students of Zuhri are narrating from him. So where did Abu Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu come in this narration from? Al-Daraqutni, he says, رواية أسامة هذا أدرجه في حديث أبي مسعود. Yani Usama entered this into the hadith of Abu Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, whereas this is not the case. وخالفه يونس وابن أخي الزهري فرواياه عن الزهري. This fact, the fact, okay, these muhaddithun guys, they're not even talking about the ziyada. They're not speaking about the ziyada, which is the extra part. They're actually speaking about the chain. But the moment there are muhaddithun that they're saying that a mistake occurred in the chain, and Usama ibn Zayd is the one making that mistake. That tells you ما حفظ, ما ضبط, that he didn't memorize it the way it's supposed to be. So now when he adds a ziyada, and even though he's thiqa, we say impossible that you're going to accept it. Normally, if the chain was completely intact and everything else was perfect, and then he just added a ziyada, for example, then you could say ziyada to thiqati maqbula. That's what some of the scholars who were trying to use this hadith as a proof, they just repeated that line that everyone uses, ziyada to thiqati maqbula. That as long as he's thiqa, trustworthy, and as long as he is the one who's adding that additional point or additional statement, then it should be accepted. What's wrong with that? But in reality, the fact that he's entering Abu Mas'ud into it, and the fact that some scholars are saying there's a waham occurring over here, this would suggest that he himself also لم يحفظ. He doesn't have the dabt of this narration the way it's meant to be, in the strength that it should be. طيب نعم. And then interestingly, Abu al-Qasim al-Tabrani, when he narrates this hadith in his Al-Awsat, you can check Mu'jam al-Awsat as well, he says لم يروي هذا الحديث عن أسامة إلا يزيد بن أبي حبيب تفرد به الليث ولم يجد أحد ممن روى هذا الحديث عن الزهري المواقيت إلا أسامة. The only one who narrated the hadith of mawaqid from Zuhri is Usama, like this man, in this manner. Okay. And Ibn Khuzaymah also, he mentioned in Sahih, هذه الزيادة لم يقلها أحد غير أسامة بن زيد. So this ziyada, which is that the messenger only did this on the first day and he never ever repeated towards it, is mahallu nadar. Yani accepting it is difficult upon the tariqah of the muhaddithin. Also it's transmitted, so another proof that they use, the ones that claim al-ghalas, وعن زيد بن وهب قال صلى بنا عمر صلاة الصبح فقرأ بني إسرائيل والكهف حتى جعلت أنظر إلى جدار المسجد هل طلعت الشمس. Zayd ibn Wahb, he says, Umar radiallahu anhu, he led us in Salatul Fajr. And he prayed Banu Israel and Al-Kahf, the entire 15th juz. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. حتى جعلت, he says, حتى جعلت أنظر إلى جدار المسجد هل طلعت الشمس. I was looking at the walls of the masjid, scared that maybe the sun had risen. That's how bright it was, and I was looking around, making sure that I couldn't see the sun outside. That's how much he delayed Fajr. Naam. So this also is a proof on behalf of them, in the sense that this is a proof to show that he started at the time of Ghalas, because he prolonged it so long. Okay, but he started when? At the time of Ghalas. And also, Muhammad ibn Sirin, he transmits from Muhajir that Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he wrote to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari that pray Fajr bisawad. Start Fajr when it's dark, وَأَطِلِ الْقِرَاءَ, and prolong the recitation. Prolong the recitation. Naam. So based on this, we have the two opinions. One opinion is that you should pray it at Isfar, and the other opinion is that you should pray it at the timing of Ghalas. The hadith which was mentioned, Asfiru, now the problem over here is that you have contradicting evidences. And over here also I'll mention a very important point. Whenever you see a khilaf between the ulama, understand that the only reason the ulama differed is because there are contradicting evidences on both sides. Do not think that the ulama of the past differed because one of them didn't reach the hadith didn't reach him. That is a very amateur way of looking at fiqh. An extremely amateur way of looking at fiqh. That time was a time where ilm was widespread and ulama were in each city and town. And so Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah, he was in Kufa. Who else was in Kufa? Sufyan al-Thawri was in Kufa. And before them, great ulama of hadith were also in Kufa. So the idea that hadith didn't reach Kufa, or some hadith didn't reach Medina, for example, this is a very difficult stance to prove. It's a very amateur way of looking at fiqh. The reason why the imam or one scholar didn't act upon a certain narration is because he didn't know the hadith. That's a very, very weak way of looking at it. The real reason khilaf ever occurs between the ulama, whatever you study, whenever there's khilaf, whatever it may be, the reason why khilaf occurs is because there are contradicting opinions or contradicting evidences that are present, and evidences are far beyond simply verses of the Quran and hadith. This is also a very amateur way of looking at fiqh. In fact, the one who thinks this has no idea how fiqh works. Anyone who thinks the only thing that constitutes an evidence in our deen is the ayah of the Quran or a statement of the Messenger and that's it. If that is your view, then that means that you have not studied the ABCs of fiqh. The one who thinks the only evidences are the ayat of the Quran and the ahadith of Rasulullah. Yes, these are evidences and they're the greatest of evidences. This is wahi, this is revelation. They're not the only evidence in our shara'. Why? Because the ayat of Quran are very general, generic verses. If you were to try and find in the entire Quran the exact timing of these salawat, you wouldn't find it. If you were to try and find in the entire Quran the amount of raka'at in each of these salawat, you wouldn't find it. If you were to try and look for in the entire Quran the conditions of when zakat will become a mandation, compulsory upon an individual, would you find it? Any verse? As al-Hufad, mashallah. Guys, remember any verse that says that zakat is, these are the conditions and this is when you pay and this is the amount of money that you have to have? No. Allah says, wa'atu zakat, that's it. Clarity is not mentioned in the Quran regarding the ahkam with precision. That's because the Quran was not revealed to clarify the ahkam with precision. That's why Allah sent along with the Quran a messenger, so he can teach us how to act upon the Quran. So the clarity of the majority of the mujmal, the ambiguous and non-clear verses that are mentioned in the Quran, ahkam that are mentioned, is found where? In the ahadith of Rasulullah. But even then, the ahadith of Rasulullah did not mention every single scenario. That's not the case. And when it comes to the narrations of the Messenger, there are two ways that those narrations are going to be transmitted. This is also very misunderstanding in the thought process, so I'll mention this as well. Some think that the only way that you can transmit an action of the Messenger is by way of a Sahabi saying the Messenger said so and so. That is completely false. If you think that the only way that you can determine that the Messenger said something is when a Sahabi says the Messenger said so and so, and that is the only way, that is completely false. That's not true. Even according to the Muhaddithun, that's not true. The ulama don't say that. There are other ways as well to determine what the Messenger said and what he was upon. One of the greatest ways to determine what the Messenger said and what he was upon is the actions of the companions, especially if all of them act upon something. If there are a number of great companions acting upon something, then do you think the disciples of these great companions ever had even the doubt or even the question crossed their mind to ask their teachers, the companions, the close companions of the Messenger, where'd you get this from? They would know 100% by default that they only got this from the Messenger ﷺ. So if a companion, for example, as a teacher, he's teaching his disciples and he prays salah in a certain way, and he doesn't tell them that I got this from the Messenger ﷺ. Like, why is he teaching them salah? Does he not realize that I'm teaching them salah, and if they think, are they going to assume that I got it from myself? Do you make up ibadat yourself? The answer is no. So the amal of the Sahaba as well is a very strong proof. And you study this in more detail in usul, especially when there's a number of Sahaba acting upon an action, or there's tawaruth of al-amal, there's a continuity of action generation upon generation, then that is a big deal. And that is actually the real reason why the khilaf occurred, is because of this in the salawat. As we mentioned, when it comes to Asr, Muhammad al-Hasan al-Shaybani explicitly said in al-Hujjah ala al-Madinah, he said that the people of Kufa and Iraq, they used to do ta'khir of Asr. They would pray Asr late. And the people of Medina, they used to do ta'jeel. Explicitly. And they took that from their teachers, and they took that from their teachers. That's the way it was passed down. And so Abu Hanifa and the majority of the Iraqiyun and the Kufiyun stuck with the opinion of the people of Iraq, and the majority of the Madaniyun stuck with the opinion of the people of Medina. That's just the way it works. So this is the way a lot of the khilaf is coming from the time of the Sahaba, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, and the Mujtahidun, they try to give tarjeeh at times, and the majority of the times the Mujtahid will give tarjeeh to the amal that is found within the place he is from. So Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, he doesn't give tarjeeh to opinions that are outside of the scholars of Medina. When he gives a preference, or when he chooses an opinion to adopt, he's going to adopt the opinion that was held by the scholars of Al-Madinah, Al-Munawwara. Likewise, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, 9 out of 10 times he's going to adopt an opinion which was held by the scholars of Kufa, which they received from their teachers, and those teachers received from their teachers, and so on and so forth, all the way till the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the way fiqh works. And then they go through the evidences and they cross and compare these evidences and see which one can be given strength. So over here we have two evidences. Number one, in both authentic narrations, these are actually narrations explicitly that would be going against each other. One was أسفروا بالفجر فإنه أعظم للأجر. That is explicit. أسفروا بالفجر. إسفار بالفجر. طيب, how do they respond? The ones that respond to this, how do they respond to this narration? So some of them, and this response is actually transmitted from Imam Shafi'i and some of the early ulama, they say what's intended by Isfar is not actually to make Fajr bright or pray Fajr at a time which is bright. طيب, so what's intended by Isfar then? He says what's intended by Isfar is حصول اليقين بطلوع الصبح. Just make sure that طلوع الفجر الصادق actually occurred. The redness actually came on the horizon. However, guys, this is a very, very distant ta'wil of that narration. Very difficult. To say asfiru bil fajr is in the meaning of make sure that Fajr time actually started. Okay. In the other version of this narration, it says nawwiru bil fajr. Nawwiru. Wording nawwiru. طيب. What does that mean? Make sure that Fajr time actually started. Like, where is the light at the timing of al-Fajr al-Sadiq? There is no light. It's extremely dark. So some scholars try to do ta'wil of this narration, try to interpret this narration and give it a separate meaning, which was that what's intended by the Messenger in this narration is that simply make sure that Fajr time actually started. Don't pray when you're still doubting whether the redness came on the horizon or not. Like, okay, over here we'll mention another point. They did ta'wil. In fact, this ta'wil is transmitted from Imam Shafi rahimahullah and early scholars. So they interpreted the hadith. Is interpretation of the narration acceptable or not acceptable? So we say over here, people are upon two extremes and the correct understanding is the middle path. Some think that you cannot interpret any narration. And this is also because of their ignorance. If they actually study the narrations enough, they would realize that there are so many narrations, the apparent meaning of them are contradictory, are literally contradicting each other. So you have to interpret. What does interpretation mean? It means to give a meaning to the narration which is not the apparent meaning. Either you say there's a few things you can do. So when you have narrations that directly are contradicting each other, what do you do? Either you say the Messenger himself contradicted himself, and that is kufr. That is disbelief. Anyone who says and claims that the Messenger directly contradicted himself, knowing what he was saying, that is a very dangerous statement. So that's impossible. The Messenger could not have contradicted himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's the other option? You say one narration is more authentic, we're going to take that over the second one. Like, what if they're both equally authentic? Then what's the option? Then they try and take a meaning or associate one meaning to a narration that would be in line with the other narrations, depending on which one they feel is stronger. That is exactly what they did over here. Which is that they wanted to give tarjih to the opinions of Ghalas because they felt they were stronger. Like the hadith of Aisha, kunna nisa'ul mu'minat. Likewise, what Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma said, even though that was marfu', but because he said kunna nusalliha ma'an nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that is rafa' as well, marfu' as well. So the hadith that proves that we previously mentioned, they felt these were stronger, and there was a narration, they knew it existed, asfiru bil fajr, but they had to somehow explain what it meant. So they tried to make this linguistic understanding of it so it could be in line with the other narrations. This ta'wil is done by the fuqaha on both sides and it's completely fine. And it is ijtihadi. It's based on the ijtihad of that mujtahid. Yes, it doesn't mean you have to accept it. But at the same time, it is done and it is accepted. Okay? So anyone who denies ta'wil altogether is upon an extreme. And like I said, most likely they're not well versed with how the hadith are. And likewise, they're not well versed with how fiqh actually works. It's a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge. Simple as that. Like, there's another extreme, which is to remove the qadasa, the holiness of the narrations, and to allow yourself to, based on your own minimal and amateur understanding of the language of Arabic, try and figure out meanings in narrations yourself. That is also very problematic. Just to support an opinion. So there's an opinion that you want to support, so let's just take this narration and figure out a meaning that, so the narration doesn't go against the opinion. This is also not munasib. This is also not munasib. Okay, no one's telling you to leave your madhab, but at the same time, don't make a joke out of the narrations, the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At the end of the day, this is the statement of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So just because if a narration, for example, were to go against a madhab that a person is upon, then he should be careful. Look at what the ulama say. If he's able to find in the kalam of the ulama something that makes sense, then mention it. If he's not able to find in the kalam of the ulama of the past an explanation for that narration, then tawaqqaf, be quiet. Okay, you can still follow your madhab, but don't delve into yourself thinking about the narration and let me figure out what it means and try and create a meaning for it so that it doesn't go against my madhab. This is also not munasib. Okay, and this is not in line with the respect that we should have for the words of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The middle ground is ta'wil is needed at times, but that ta'wil will be done based on qara'in lughawiyya, based on ma'rifah, knowledge of tariq, based on our understanding of language, based on our understanding of the factors that will lead towards giving strength to one evidence over the other evidence. And it's a long process. That's the entire ilm of usul al-fiqh is to teach this. What are the murajjihat when there is khilaf between, when there is ta'arud zahiri between the evidences? That is the whole purpose of ilm usul al-fiqh. It's to teach you the exact process that you will take when there seemingly appears to be contradiction in narrations. طيب. So one response to give is this. The second response to give is that it's mansukh. And in the beginning, the Messenger ﷺ used to do isfar, and later on, he never used to do isfar. Okay, this is also weak. Why? Because you can't just claim nasakh. You can't just claim abrogation. In order to claim abrogation, you need to have a very strong proof that would suggest to you of why and how the abrogation occurred. So they respond by saying, we have the hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, and that is authentic. It's an authentic chain. Now, what does the hadith say? The hadith says that we used to, the Messenger of Allah pray Salatul Fajr at the timing of Ghalas. And then later on, after Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the time of Uthman, that's when Isfar started. That is when Isfar started. So we say the statement of Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhuma cannot go against the hadith of the Messenger, Asfiru bil Fajr. فإنه أعظم للأجر. Okay, so the idea of claiming nasakh, although they will have an argument if they use the narration of Ibn Umar, but still nasakh requires far more to prove that abrogation actually occurred. That requires, and another thing is, this is not abrogation, this is a matter of fadila, yani which one's better. So what's becoming mansukh over here? And the disagreement over here is not one is right, one is wrong. Disagreement is which one's better. Okay, so proving abrogation is also difficult. طيب, what about the opposite side? What about the hadith of taghlis, yani ghalas? How do they respond to those narrations? Some of them the same thing. They said, ghalas was initially in the beginning and then it became mansukh. That as well is very difficult. You cannot prove that. It's very difficult to do that. Another proof that they gave, or response that they gave, is that initially ghalas was, if ghalas was mustahab, then why did the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum have ijma' upon al-isfar? So the response to that is that لا نسلم الإجماع. We don't accept the ijma'. And who claimed that the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum had ijma' upon isfar? If they had ijma', why is there khilaf? And if they had ijma', there would never be khilaf. The fact that khilaf is mawjood means the Sahaba were not unanimously agreed upon a certain opinion. Okay. Some of them responded by saying that, the hadith that are marfu'a, there's ta'arud in them. So إذا تعارض الدليلان تساقطا. What's the qaida usuliyya? When there's two proofs that are contradicting and you're not able to figure out a way of giving preference to one, then they both fall and they both are nullified or cancelled. So then we're going to go to the athar of the Sahaba. Like we say the athar are also mukhtalifa. In the athar you find the same problem that you find in the ahadith marfu'a, which is that there's also differences in the athar. طيب. Some of them, they adopted the opinion that you should start in ish, ghalas, and finish in isfar, and through this they tried to do jama' between all these narrations. And wallahu a'lam, this is a very, very strong way of looking at it. Because when the Messenger says asfiru bil fajr فإنه أعظم للأجر. طيب, كيف أعظم للأجر? Why would it be more in reward? Prolong fajr until isfar. إنه أعظم للأجر. You're going to get more reward. Standing in fajr for 1 hour is better than standing in fajr for 5 minutes, right? Or 10 minutes. Asfiru bil fajr. Go till isfar in fajr. فإنه أعظم للأجر. This is not a ta'wil ba'id. And this is in line with what many of the Sahaba would command and what they would do themselves, radiallahu ta'ala anhu ajma'in, is that they will start Salatul Fajr in the time of Ghalas and then they would prolong it all the way till Isfar. And this is what Imam Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala gave preference to in Sharh Ma'al al-Athar. And in Sharh Ma'al al-Athar, Imam Tahawi attributed this opinion to the Hanafiya. That the Ahnaf also say that you start in Ghalas and you finish in Isfar. Although that is misunderstood. Why is it misunderstood? Imam Muhammad al-Hasan al-Shaybani in Al-Hujjah ala Ahl al-Madinah, he mentions this situation. So what does he say? He says قد جاء في ذلك آثار مختلفة من التغليس والإسفار بالفجر. Then he says والإسفار بالفجر أحب إلينا. He says according to us Isfar is more preferred. Exactly what he says here. وكان يرى الإسفار بالفجر. And then he says Isfar is better. Then he gives the reason. He says لأن القوم كانوا نعم يغلسون فيطيلون القراءة فينصرفون كما ينصرف أصحاب الإسفار. This is in Al-Hujjah al-Madinah. He literally says this exact wording. That people used to start in the dark, in the timing when it was dark, and they would continue praying all the way till Isfar, and they would finish off their salah the same time the people of Isfar would finish off. ويدرك النائم وغيره الصلاة. وقد بلغنا أن أبي بكر الصديق رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه قرأ سورة البقرة في صلاة الصبح. Then he says, this is why they would start in غلس. فإنما كانوا يغلسون لذلك. This is why they would start in the early time, because they would prolong their salah. Then he says, فأما من خفف وصلى بسورة المفصل ونحوها فإنه ينبغي له أن يسفر. He says, as for the one who prays a short Fajr, he should start in the timing of Isfar and finish in the timing of Isfar. Pray Fajr late. So it's as if Imam Muhammad is suggesting over here in Al-Hujjah ala Al-Madinah, the actual opinion of the Hanafiya is that what is afdal is that you start in Ghalas and you continue all the way till Isfar. And it would still count as if you did Isfar. And that would still, why does it still work? Because the people are still, the one who's sleeping is still able to do idrak of Jama'ah. But if you're not to do that, then what's better, to pray only 10 minutes in the beginning, right in the beginning, or 10 minutes in the end? They say 10 minutes in the end. Because in that Jama'ah will be more. طيب. So this is the mas'ala regarding Isfar. Then Imam Muhammad also gives ishara to the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala regarding وقت العصر, which is مثلين. And he says, وأما في قولنا فإنا نقول إذا زاد الظل على المثل فصار مثل الشيء وزيادة حين زالت الشمس فقد دخل وقت العصر. وأما أبو حنيفة فقال لا يدخل وقت العصر حتى يصير الظل مثليه. We already explained this entire discussion. He's basically saying that his opinion, Imam Muhammad, his opinion is that, which is مثل أول, يعني as long as one length is the length of the height of the individual is achieved in the shadow, then timing of Asr starts, and according to Abu Hanifa, it's double that size, double that length. I will stop over here and we'll continue with the next narration in the next lesson.